Welcome to my airbrushing series. In this video, I'll be explaining the different parts of an airbrush machine, showing how to set them up, use them efficiently, and how to break the gun down for effective cleaning.
Live in the moment till I die. And I'm gonna chase it. And I'm gonna chase it. I know we can't ignore it, no matter how hard we try. And I'm gonna chase it. And I'm gonna chase it.
An airbrush machine is made up of a few pieces of equipment: the airbrush gun, the air compressor, the hose, the power cord, and an optional cleaning pot and stand. The airbrush gun is the tool that dispenses the product onto the skin. The trigger controls the airflow and how much product is released. The main body of the gun contains a thin needle which is controlled by the trigger. And since this is a gravity-fed airbrush gun, the cup on top is used to hold the product. Alternative airbrush guns include side-fed, suction-fed, and spray guns. The air compressor is the machine that outputs the air pressure for the airbrush gun. Some compressors have built-in stands for the airbrush gun to sit in when not in use. And depending on the type of compressor you purchase, some have a PSI regulator gauge, which allows you to adjust the pressure being output. There's also a section for the airbrush hose to connect and a hole for the power adapter to connect if the compressor requires one. Finally, an on-off switch will be located somewhere on the compressor. The hose is what connects the airbrush gun to the compressor and should be screwed tightly onto each end of the machines to ensure no air leaks out of any gaps. There are different types of hoses you can purchase, but typically they will come with a screw-on attachment at both ends and be braided cord or spiraled. The power adapter will provide power to your airbrush compressor, and unless your equipment is battery powered or rechargeable, will not work without one. Optional equipment that you could purchase for your kit include a cleaning pot. These are usually glass and have a stand attached for your airbrush gun to sit on when not in use. Small cleaning kits will allow you to effectively clean your gun when needed, and the filter on top will prevent any excess product from dispersing in the air and being breathed in through the process. Now we're going to look at how to set up an airbrush machine. Attach the power adapter to the compressor, screw the airbrush gun onto the hose, and screw the other end to the compressor. Ensure both ends are tight to prevent air leaking out. Turn the machine on and you're ready to go. In my techniques video, I'll be covering how to use your airbrush gun, depending on which type of product and machine you are using. Now we are going to look at breaking down the airbrush gun for cleaning. There are two different types of cleans I'm going to show you to do. The basic breakdown is recommended before using your machine and in between colours. The deep clean is recommended at the end of airbrush session use to ensure no paint is left inside the gun, which can cause blockages and issues and reduce the longevity of your equipment.
In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to break down your airbrush gun for a clean and how to prime your gun before you start using it. So I've got some isopropyl alcohol, or IPA for short. I've got some distilled water, I chose the Mist Air one, and some air-based silicone thinner and cleaner. It depends what type of paint you're using as to which one you'll use to prime your airbrush gun. So typically if you're using water-based, you'll use the water. If you're using alcohol-based, you'll use the IPA. If you're using silicone-based, you'll use the silicone. So for this video, I'm going to use water to clean it out. Now, even though I am using water-based paints, I will probably still use a little bit of alcohol in a second. But I've just filled up the cup, popped the water in the cup, and then put my finger on the end, and I'm pulling back the trigger slightly. So by putting my finger on the end of the gun and pulling the trigger back, what this is going to do is cause a buildup of air inside the cup, and it produces something called back bubbling. I do this around 3 or 4 times, depends how much paint is in the cup and how badly it needs cleaning. Sometimes I'll give it just a tiny bit of a stir just inside the cup to pull any paint off the sides of it and just make sure that it sits in that water, which can then be pushed out. So I'm popping my finger back on the end of the gun again, back bubbling another couple of times just to make sure that paint doesn't get stuck at the bottom. And then I'm going to take my airbrush cleaning pot and I'm just going to pour this liquid in the pot first. Sometimes I'll do this maybe twice, 3 times, like I said, it depends how dirty your airbrush gun is. I think in this one I just used it once, and then again just put a fresh water in and back bubble again. It's really important that when you put your finger on the end of the gun that it is nice and tight so the air doesn't escape and the water doesn't just burst out everywhere. If you don't want to use your finger, you can use a sponge on the end and press the gun into that, but I just usually use my finger. So you can see I've done this a few times, and now on this last time, I'm going to spray it inside the cleaning pot. So there is a little filter on the top, which means that anything I'm pushing out from the airbrush gun and into that pot isn't going to burst right back out of the pot and end up in the air. This just means that I'm not inhaling as many fumes. So if I'm using water-based paints and I've cleaned it through with water, or I have been using water-based paints and I've cleaned it through with water, I'm now going to use a little bit of IPA just to disinfect the gun and make sure there's nothing left in it. I do use a pipette to drop my alcohol in. Again, I'm really messy just so it doesn't go everywhere. And this bit's really important that when you are expelling the alcohol from the airbrush gun, that you do use some sort of container that does have a filter on it so that all that alcohol doesn't end up in the air. You can also wear a face mask if you need to as well. So once I've given the gun a quick prime and clean, if you've already done a deep clean on your airbrush after you've finished using it, then chances are you'll only need to do the very basic back bubble and simple clean. You won't need to do a full deep clean again. This is something that you can do at the end of your makeup look or whenever you've used it. So I'm starting by removing the handle of the airbrush gun. And if you notice, I'm putting it all onto a plastic lid. That's just so all my bits don't roll away from me. I'm also taking off the chucking nut. And I'm going to pop that on the plastic lid as well. And then I'm going to take out the needle. So as you can see here, even though I cleaned it, it does still have a little bit of paint on it. Next, I'm going to remove the head cap, nozzle cap, and the needle cap. Now mine only has 2 pieces. Sometimes they come in 3, sometimes they come in 2. So try and break those down and just add them onto the lid. So at this point, this would be your very basic standard clean. If you didn't want to go much more than this, then that's absolutely fine. This is normally what I would do when I finish using my gun, just to give it a really nice clean and get rid of any paint that might be stuck inside the lid or the nozzle. If you wanted to do a full deep clean, which I know a lot of airbrush companies do offer as a service, but I always thought it was important to learn how to do it so that you knew how to use the piece of equipment you owned. So I've just twisted off the spring guide, and the needle spring has come out with that as well. So you can see the spring in my right hand there. And then we have the needle chucking guide with the auxiliary lever in my other hand. I don't actually need to clean these, so I've just put these to one side. And then I've taken out the main lever or the trigger, the piston, whatever you want to call it. There's lots of different names for the same piece. And we're just left with the body of the gun. My gun has a really small cup, which you can use if you're only doing small scale body paints or makeup or anything with small details. So I'm just taking a brush and I've taken some alcohol and I'm just wiping out the insides. The brushes I tend to use are synthetic rather than horsehair, and that's just so the fibres don't get stuck in the gun. So now I'm adding some IPA into the tub that I have my pieces in. And this is going to help them soak while I'm cleaning them. So I just pick up each individual piece and using my brush, just give it a really nice clean out, making sure there's no little bits of paint. Once I'm done with it, I just pop it to the side with the rest of the pieces. So I tend to clean the cup and the nozzle and the needle cap, because this is where the paint gets stuck the most. I'm also going to pick up the needle and again just give that a really nice clean, You've got to be really careful with the needle just because it is really sharp on the end. Sometimes I'll just run my fingers over it just to get rid of any stubborn bits of paint. So if you were using silicone-based paints, you will be using the silicone-based cleaner to clean all your pieces. I probably would still do an alcohol clean afterwards, just to completely remove any traces of silicone thinner cleaner out of your gun, especially if you're going to be using the gun for multiple different types of paint. So for example, sometimes I'll do an airbrush makeup where I'll have to clean out with silicone-based cleaner, but I'll be moving on to doing some sort of body art with water-based paint. So it's really important that I do use alcohol in between these two changes of paint so that it doesn't create that solution that will block up my gun. So now I'm going to put the airbrush gun back together. I'm going to start by adding in the needle chucking guide with the auxiliary lever. And I've also put the spring on this piece as well, so it will all go in as one. You have to kind of angle the piece at like a 45-degree angle, and then it should just kind of slide in. And hopefully, if you've done it right, it should come through the hole on the top of the body. Next, I'm going to add in the trigger. Now on your trigger, you'll usually have a little indent on the back of it. It's really important that that indent is facing towards the back of the gun. I'm just giving it a bit of a check to make sure that it does bounce up and down. Next, I'm screwing on the spring guide, and you want to make sure this is on nice and tight. So once I've screwed it on, I should be able to pull that trigger back, and it should bounce back as well. I should also be able to press it up and down, and there shouldn't be any kind of resistance. Next, I'm going to add on the nozzle cap and the needle cap. Like I said, these pieces have so many different names, but they're all the same thing. The bit at the front protects your needle, essentially. So I'm going to screw those two bits back on. Sometimes they'll come in 3, sometimes they'll come in 2, sometimes they'll come in 1. It depends what brand you get. So I always put the nozzle and the needle cap back on first, before sliding the needle in. And that's just so I don't prick myself, really. You want to make sure the needle is pushed in properly, so just give it a bit of a budge. And then I'm going to screw the needle chucking nut over the top and pop my cup back on. My airbrush gun has interchangeable cups, which is why I have to screw my cup back on. I know there are a lot of airbrush guns out there, especially beginner ones, where you don't necessarily have to take the cup off the gun. And then to finish, I just put the handle back on and screw that on nice and tight. And there you go, you've got a nice clean gun. And you didn't have to pay any brands for a servicing.
I hope this video has given you the information you need to be able to set up and clean your airbrush effectively. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop me a message or comment and I'll help the best I can. For more information on kit essentials, including an airbrush machine buying guide, products and techniques, check out my other video where I'll be breaking this all down and giving you everything you need to know to become an airbrushing pro.